Welcome to my second video in relationship to DML speakers. In this video, I discuss adding a bass speaker to the DML. In my first video, I discussed my attempt at building a DML speaker, and this was specifically to be used with an electronic wind instrument. I was very pleased with the results, and the results were a lot better than I had expected. This first attempt used a piece of 3mm Perspex sheet and one transducer. It became very evident quickly that a bass speaker was required to cover the lower frequencies. This video discusses my first attempt at adding a built bass speaker. In about 1976, I built a tapered quarter wave tube loudspeaker. That time I was really pleased with the results. They had a very nice sound to them, and I used an 8-inch speaker along with a tweeter. I built the speakers using a design from an electronics magazine. I looked for this original article but wasn't able to find it. These two web pages were very helpful, although I used them only as a general guide. As this was an experiment, I didn't want to spend a lot of money on building the speakers, and while shopping one day I came across what's referred to here in New Zealand as tri-board. It comprises of 3 layers, 2 very dense layers on the top and the bottom, and a more softer wood fiber in between. This shop had some sheets of it, which were 2,360 millimeters by 310 millimeters by 15 millimeters, and only cost $8 per sheet. These pre-cut sizes influence the overall size of my speakers. This diagram represents the size of the speakers I built. As can be seen, I used an 8-inch speaker on the top of the speaker boxes. This speaker fires upwards towards the ceiling. I also used some padding within the boxes. I found the construction process very easy and straightforward. Because the sheets were cut by machine lengthwise, they fitted very well and were very accurate and were very easy to put together. The only cuts I had to make were going across the panels to make them to the correct length. The panels were glued and screwed to the side. The glue was allowed to dry, and then the other side was put on top and also glued and screwed. This is a picture of one of them finished, although they are just still rough wood. The DML panel is fitted to the front of the speaker. I am somewhat concerned about reflections off of the Perspex DML panel, which would go and hit the front of the hard front of the speaker box. I'm thinking that I may need to add some sort of absorbent material or some sort of reflector behind the DML panel. I selected this design because I felt that the bass speakers would have very little interaction with the DML speaker. I used the same size of Perspex sheet that I used in the original video, but I did change the vibration or transducers for this particular DML. I changed to this transducer and used 2 of them in series, which produces a 8 ohm load. As previously, I found that the edge of the transducer was quite small, and they tended to be difficult to stick to the perspex. And so I 3D printed a sort of foot for it, and I epoxy resined the transducer to this foot. Because the perspex sheet is wider than the front of the speaker box, I designed and built these using a 3D printer. The perspex fits into the slot at the top, and there is holes for a bolt to go through to secure the perspex. I included a curve to give some flexibility to the holder. The holder sticks out approximately 3 centimeters from the box. The corner is used as a way of lining up the edges, and it is also screwed to the cabinet using the 2 holes. For the amplifier, I used 2 Class D amplifiers. Each of the Class D amplifiers were stereo, with one channel taking care of the bass and the other channel taking care of the DML. I also use an active crossover, which crosses over at about 330 Hertz. This is an active device, and I find it works very well. I did look at the possibility of using a passive crossover, but found after the calculations were done that the size of the capacitors and inductance were too large and difficult to obtain. Using an active crossover gives a very good result. The wires for the amplifiers are soldered to the bottom of the crossover. The crossover is powered by a small transformer of its own, and the 2 power amplifiers have 1 power supply each, and this is 24 volts and 5 amps. This is the details of the crossover used, which I find works extremely well. The crossover frequency is quite slow. The slope is quite slow, but I find it does produce a good sound. I used a 12-volt transformer to supply the power to the crossover. This is the sort of power supply I used for the 2 main amplifiers. I used 2 of these boards, giving 4 channels. Rather than saying left channel, right channel, I connected them so that they were the bass speaker and the DML speaker. They have small potentiometers on the amplifier board, and I particularly liked using them to make an adjustment to get a better balance between the 2 speakers. So the question really is, how does it sound? Very good. I realize that this is very subjective. I also realize that I don't have good test equipment to be able to know exactly what frequency response is, but to me, the sound is extremely good. I find that the source material has a very big influence naturally upon the overall output and quality. In the early 1980s, I lived in Hong Kong and purchased a couple of Autat Lansing speakers. Back in those days, they used to make good quality speakers, and these were well in excess of $1,000 US when I purchased them. That's in excess of $5,000 now. And therefore, as part of the testing process, I compared the 2. I was always happy with the Autat Lansing. I'd taken good care of them, and they are in perfect condition. But I find that the hybrid DML sound better. This is particularly true in relationship to the stage. The instruments are very accurately placed and stay exactly where they should be, if that makes sense. I also find that the soundstage stays very stable even if you're not sitting directly in between the two speakers. For what these speakers cost, the end result was extremely good. I've had a number of friends come and listen to the speakers, and they have been very impressed with the overall sound. One young friend came and listened to some hip hop with a great deal of bass, and he was very impressed. I've listened to a couple of movies, including Avatar, and what impressed me about that was that the original recording was in Dolby surround sound, but with just two speakers, the overall sound was really good. Had a very, very wide stage. I intend to keep experimenting. The things I'm going to try next is actually get a piece of black perspex, paint the front of the speaker boxes black, put some sort of absorbent material on the front of the speaker box, and try a few other adjustments to see what impact it has upon the overall quality of sound. And finally, for what it cost me to build them, the overall sound is outstanding. Thank you for watching the video.